Modifiers can be added to our animation just the same as the speed options and in the same way, meaning they always need to be applied to the keyframe at the start of any animated section. Modifiers do what the name suggests really. In a panned animation, for example, the modifier can vary the course of the pan in a variety of ways. A modifier can create movement in an image, object or text, even if that is all that's added to the keyframe. But I think they're more likely to be applied to other animation, such as that which we're seeing in the mini player at the moment. I think modifiers are going to need a degree of trial and error before we start to get the best from them. And if you're more of a traditional audiovisual enthusiast, you may not use modifiers that much. But they do alter the traditional movement that we see with our images, as you can see here. So let's take a look at the basics of modifiers in this video, and I'm going to include a number of slide styles that I've created up to now that use modifiers. You can apply those slide styles to your own images and then investigate how they work by opening them up once they've been applied into the objects and animation screen. In fact, perhaps we can look at one or two later within this video. Here you can see what I've done, just dropped this sky down into the slide list. I'm going to open up the objects and animation screen. Make sure I've got no bounding box around the edge of the sky. I'm going to go to my insert an image and I'm going to pick up this balloon. The balloon's made colossal in size, so I need to go to my animation tab, the zoom hyperlink at 100% to reset this back to its original size. Now I've chosen to use the background sky and the balloon here just for visual interest. There's no other reason for doing so. I could go up to the top of the screen and just create a shape like this to do exactly what we're going to do with the balloon. But I'll delete that and reselect the balloon. In normal circumstances, animation would need two keyframes, as we know. One is the waypoint that tells us where the balloon is going to start the animation. The second keyframe is going to tell us where the balloon stops, and we need to place the balloon where we want it to start and end. A modifier will actually add movement to just one keyframe, and I think the best thing I can do is just add one quickly to demonstrate that. I'm going to go to the top right, pan, add a modifier, pan X, and I'm going to choose oscillation. Now we can see the modifier settings here, which we can tuck away if we need space, and of course via the little cogwheel we can either disable them temporarily or remove them completely, and you'll also notice a few settings. But when I come to the bottom left and press play, normally we wouldn't expect to see any movement at all, but now we are, because we've applied a pan oscillation in a parameter of X, which is left and right. And of course it follows that if I remove that and add pan Y in oscillation and do the same again, well, I think that was pretty predictable. X left and right, Y up and down, Z back and forth. In the introduction I was talking about adding modifiers to a normal animation, a pan perhaps. So let's set one up. Let me take away that modifier, remove it completely. I'll put my balloon down at the bottom left to start its flight, and we'll hit the insert key to give a second keyframe. So our balloon is going to fly from bottom left to top right. What we can also do is add a modifier, remembering that we would need to select the first keyframe, and we can add modifiers and speed, of course. So all I'm going to do here with the pan is to go back to my pan X and choose oscillation, and we'll leave the settings at 50, which is the amount of movement left and right you're going to see. The repeats is sort of like one cycle, and the shift just moves the position of the movement, if that's the right way to explain it. Let me press play, and you can see that the balloon now does a little jig in the center there. That is the modifier doing its work on the pan, left and right, and slightly upwards too. If I go back to my starting keyframe, you'll notice the modifier appears. Like I said earlier on, we need to always identify the correct keyframe to work from, but until we actually select the keyframe, we don't see the modifier at all. If I were to increase the repeats to 2, now we're going to get 2 cycles of the movement of the balloon between the bottom left corner and the top right. Now, I've not done a great deal of work with these, but let's see if I can put 0.5 in there, which will limit it quite a lot. And you can see how that changes the animation there. Quite subtle, really. Okay, let's go back to the first keyframe. Go back to 1 repeat. Let me drop the amplitude down to half of the default. And all it's going to do is restrict the movement a little bit. It's not quite such an S shape as it was before. So you can see what I mean when I say we're going to need a little bit of trial and error here. Now, I can think of 1 or 2 practical ways we would use modifiers. One of those maybe if we was creating something with falling leaves or falling snow, but I'm sure as we use the software more, other creative ideas will come to us. I used 1 or 2 modifiers in that demonstration of the triptych right at the start of this video, so let's go back and have a look at that. Coming back into the main screen, if we go to slide styles, I have made 2 of these. I started off with this one, which uses just a black background, but once I applied it to images in modifier 2, I just added the background and a drop shadow as well. So let me apply modifier 2. You can see it says here we require 3 images. Well, what I've got here above are 3:2 aspect ratio images, which are typical from any digital SLR. So if I select 3 of those, in fact, remember with slide styles we can apply them like this. See, I've selected all of those and dragged them down. Now, because the slide style needs 3 images, it'll apply the slide style to those 3, to those 3, and those 3, and they're all selected because I dragged them down. So if I go back to my slide style, double click modifiers 2, you can see them all jump into position. I'll include this modifier with download. Now let me select the first one of these images and we'll have a look at this in the objects and animation screen. Let's just set the scene here. Everything, or the 3 images I've got, can be controlled with a frame if need be. The sky is the background sitting at the bottom of the stack, and all I've done with that is to blur it just to give us something pleasant to look at. Now if I move the cursor gradually, you can see that the movement, particularly in this image here, is a little bit different than normal because of a modifier. But eventually they drop back into that position. If I select all 3 of these, you can see what controls them. Between 0 and virtually 5 seconds, we have the movement of all 3. But let me identify this one in the middle And if I go to the starting keyframe, you can see what I've done here. We've got a pan Y, there's a little pan X as well, but I'm not sure one is going to do a great deal. But we've got animation speed slow down because the image is coming from off screen onto screen, so slow down is usually appropriate, but you can see I've got a Y oscillation also applied, and I've got the standard settings of 50 and 1. And if you just look at the image in the middle and try to ignore the others for a moment, you can see, sorry, yes, it is the one in the middle. I was a little confused myself there. I thought it was going to drop down on the right. So let's do that again. And you can see how it sort of bounces up and turns gently and drops down into place. So there, the modifier is just giving us a little bit of a variation of a standard pan. If I go to the image on the left here and to the first keyframe, here again you can see what we've done. We've got a pan X and we've got a slow down speed. We've got a little bit of rotation. You can see it's not much, a -7, but it just gives that nice little tilt. And we've got the animation slowdown, but up here, tucked away, I've applied a Y oscillation, but here the amplitude is quite low at 10. So the movement is a little bit tempered, and I think it works reasonably well when we see them all together. You can see a little bit of a stall with this one as it comes on. And finally, if we look at number 3 and the initial keyframe, you can see I've added a little more amplitude here. I've ramped things up just a little bit. So it will take a little bit of trial and error. If we go back to the one in the center for a moment, if I was to push the amplitude just up to 90 as a trial, let's see if we can notice the difference. You see the movement is much more exaggerated, and of course the reverse of that would be to say, well, I want it to be really delicate, and let's drop it maybe to 20. And now you can see that movement, well, at 20 we hardly notice it. Here we have another slide style which opens up like a reverse book almost, opens up a little too far and then gently drops back into position, and we can see a background too. Now, to create folds I've used masks, which we've dealt with, but the movement mainly comes from the frame. And if I select the frame and the first keyframe, you can see we also have an X oscillation, standard setting there. And if we go to the next one, we can take a quick look on the right and see there's nothing there, nothing much there. So we've just got that one oscillation, but it gives that movement, and you can see it moving to our right, then over to our left, and then into the position we want it. And of course that's caused by the fact that we've used oscillation X, left and right, and as we know, we could make some adjustments here. We could make that a lot more violent. Is that the right word to use here? Well, in actual fact it doesn't make a massive difference. Let's try going the other way and dropping it right down to a delicate 10. And now we do see quite a bit of difference. And like before, a little bit difficult to see. So I think 50 was probably around the right setting there. I'll include this slide style as well. Here I have another slide style which uses modifiers. Let me put my cursor at the start and you can see how two parts of the image come together. Now when we look at this, it's not so different to the previous one. Again, I've used masks to provide those two stripe shapes. But I wonder if you remember when we dealt with masks, I said that sometimes I make the white areas a little bit bigger so that we don't see lines in the picture. Well, here in the early testing of PicturesToExe, I did find myself with lines in the picture, and that's why you can see two versions of the image here. One of them is the out of focus background, but this one here just allows a quick fade up from that point to that to make sure I remove any evidence of lines. And that little tip there saved me making or remaking the masks used within these mask containers. So let me put the cursor back here. In fact, let's come out of this screen and we'll take a look at this one, starting with that one in the mini player. Of course, the trick to using any of the settings within PicturesToExe is to try to find something which is visually interesting on the eye, but without going a little too far. And finally, here's a slide style where I let my imagination go just a little bit. I'll press play, and you can see we seem to have an almost jumble of images or parts of the image which come together nicely as the image forms. Now if you look on the right hand side, you can see it's made up of 6 individual masks. Each of those masks will have a slightly different cut out piece, like you can see here, but of course they all contain the same image. So once we create one mask, then it's quite easy to just copy and paste and then swap the mask that we wish to use in square 2 and so on all the way up the stack. And if we look at the frame here, we can see that we've got just animation speed smooth here, but in each of the masks, that's where you'll find the modifiers. And if I keep my first keyframe selected, and I'll start at the top here, which is number 6, you can see we've used X oscillation, again with the standard settings, but we've also got speed attached where appropriate. But if I go to number 5, I've switched that to the Y oscillation, again standard settings. Number 4 is much the same. Number 3, we jump to the zoom oscillation X, again staying with much the same settings. And then number 2 and number 1. So you can see here we've changed to the rotate, and all of that, which really was just trial and error, translates to something like this. So let me start off from here, just press play, and we can just take a look at that in the mini player. It all rather depends on the style of audiovisual or presentation that you're making.